Hello again, everyone. Welcome to our agriculture show, Ag Life. I am Gerard Lampow. On the menu, we meet a producer with a breed of cattle that has a name that sounds like a jewel. Plus, we learn about electric fencing in cattle management and a visit from someone who grew up in the Midwest but has spent 10 years in Ottawa looking at the labor needs in agriculture. But first, you might say it was a no-brainer for a farmer from Mannville to get this year's Ag Award for Innovation from the Alberta Science and Technology Foundation. This is he was the only one who made the criteria in that category.
There's 8 or 9 different categories, and mine was the only one that qualified for the Ag Innovation. Apparently the requirements to even become a finalist are quite strict.
We introduced you to Brian Tischler this summer with his innovation of a GPS steering system on his tractor using the open source concept. People from several countries have pitched in, making the intellectual property open to everyone and thereby getting around copyright. Tischler plans to continue developing his innovation while tweaking some of the bugs.
Right? Like, we live around 111 west longitude. Well, as you move farther away from central meridians, the angle changes. So some people were seeing like a degree difference in what it should say.
And of course, that has its use for steering the tractor. Certainly, there will be more to come from Mannville farmer Brian Tischler. Well, it's time to roll our events calendar. Remember, if you've got a community event, just email me here, glampow@newcap.ca. Let's have a look at what's on this week. And still to come, well, I think it sounds like a jewel. The Maine-Anjou breed is in focus at the Lloydminster Stockade. Do stay with us.
This segment of Ag Life is brought to you by Webb's Machinery. Webb's Machinery, your New Holland dealer in Vermilion, Vegreville, and Lamont.
Welcome back, everyone. So one of the main attractions at the 40th Stockade Roundup is the Maine-Anjou. Cassandra Hornsby tells us about the breed show.
Gary Graham of Manitou, Maine-Anjou exhibited 4 head at the Roundup this year.
I've been in full-blood Maine-Anjou cattle since I was 20 years old. And I love the cattle because they're quiet, easy keeping cattle. And We've been crossed with a lot of other breeds over the years.
Maine-Anjou originated in France and were brought to Canada in the 1960s. Judge Scott Shackey describes the breed as being used to beefen up existing cattle in North America.
It wasn't until really the late 60s, early 70s when they started to have a huge impact in our industry down in the United States. And them, along with several other breeds that we called the European breeds, had a big change in how our cattle appeared and looked in the 70s and the 80s.
Shackey says the Maine-Anjou breed has distinct characteristics.
We probably don't see them as big framed as we did in the 60s. We've reduced their frame a little bit, but they're still very muscular. They're great mothers. They make really good mothers because they milk well, and obviously from the standpoint of production of red meat, they do a really good job with that.
For Primetime Local News, I'm Cassandra Hornsby.
And it's all about safe cattle management, especially when producers are far away from the pasture. I find out there's another use of technology in taking care of livestock.
The electric fence is a psychological barrier, not a physical one.
Garth Hine works with agriculture dealers and trains farmers on soil management and as well electric fences.
So the whole idea is when an animal touches it, it gets a safe, sharp shock, and it'll say, oh, I'm going to avoid that. I'm not going to bother with that fence anymore.
Hine says the wire does not have to be tight, it just needs to be there and visible.
the advantages of having it a little looser is that if you get snow load in the winter, it won't put pressure on the posts. It'll just sag with it and it'll be fine.
Producers may want to turn their cows on the swaths for the winter, swath grazing, but the cattle need to be trained up on that.
So if they can do that early and do it this time of year before the ground's frozen, cattle will have a healthy respect for that, for the wire, and they'll have a little less, they'll challenge it a little bit less in the winter time.
Then there's the issue of the power requirement on your acreage.
If you're doing, say, a quarter section of land, I would recommend a customer use nothing smaller than I would say probably 10 joules of energy, which is about the mid-range of the power on our energizers.
Voltage is also important, as he says. That's the pressure on the fence. For cattle, you need no less than 3,000 volts. Then there's the issue of solar versus plugging in.
Solar is something that a lot of our producers need to use here in Western Canada because they're renting pastures that are farther away from home. Sometimes, though, a producer will be maybe a quarter mile from home, and plug-in power is less expensive.
And when we come back, well, we meet someone from the Midwest region who works in our nation's capital dealing with the labor shortfall in agriculture. Do stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for staying with us here in Ag Life. I was quite excited to learn that my next guest was actually born and raised in the Midwest region. In fact, she grew up on a farm in the Hillmont area, but she works at the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council in Ottawa. Debra Hauer tells us about a new survey that's trying to get the numbers on the labor shortfall in agriculture.
What we do is we develop labor market forecasts looking at, we're hearing from farmers that they're having difficulty finding people to work on their farms. So what we're trying to do is find out what the shortages are now, and considering the demographics and impending retirements, what the labor market needs will be 10 years in the future. So right now we have a survey that is out where we're asking farmers, agricultural producers, people who are farm workers, either family or non-family members, to fill out surveys so we can get an idea as to what the labor issues are on farms. 4 years ago, we did this survey at that time, and we found out that there were 26,400 jobs for which no bodies could be found. They were vacant, and that cost the agricultural industry $1.5 billion. So we do our forecasts nationally, but we also do them by province. So we have a Saskatchewan forecast, an Alberta forecast, and also we do it by do our forecast by commodity. So we have a forecast for grain and oilseed, and also for beef, also for pork. So we're encouraging producers of all different types to fill out our survey.
Right. And as you say, all different types now, and I'm glad that you're telling me you're breaking it down by sector, by industry there, grain seed as opposed to beef kind of thing, and even Alberta as compared to Saskatchewan. If we could probably get some themes here going, and what are the forecasts saying, like say, let's start with province-wide, Alberta, and then we'll touch on Saskatchewan. So
in Alberta, there were about 4,500 jobs that were vacant in 2014, and it cost the industry in Alberta about $400 million. And the reason for that is the particular mix of commodities. So it includes grain and oilseeds, beef, and also horticulture and greenhouse is very important in the industry. So all of those together all had shortages. Wow. And especially in the feedlot industry and the beef industry, people have increasing difficulty finding people to work on their farms. And so when you add that all up, that's what we found.
That's the $400 million that we're looking at.
That's right.
And this is as of 2014.
So we're now, things have moved on since then, and so we're going out again to find out exactly what the situation is in the 2018 crop year. That will help us then develop new 10-year forecasts to 2029.
Right.
In Saskatchewan, at that time in 2014, there were about 3,900 jobs that were vacant at that time, and that cost the industry about $239 million. Now, with Saskatchewan, the grain and oilseed industry is very important, and what we found was that the number of people who were, the number of vacant positions were smaller. However, with the grain and oilseed industry, because it's so highly mechanized, every missing body makes a big difference to the bottom line of every farm, and then also then to the industry as a whole. So when we think about the grain and oilseed industry across the country, about $570 million was lost in the industry in 2014 because of unfilled vacancies.
All right. Now, just how this difference is, because we're looking at it on the prairies and focusing on where we're at, Alberta, Saskatchewan, but it's different compared to, say, in BC or even out east.
Yes. So in BC, for example, or Ontario and Quebec, horticulture is very important, and for many years, temporary foreign workers have come to work on farms, specifically horticulture farms. So when I talk to people about the shortages in agriculture, they say, oh, yes, in horticulture. However, because up until recently, farmers have been able to get the temporary foreign workers that they needed, they reported fewer unfilled vacancies than farms in grain and oilseeds.
Right, so you've got that aspect of it. And of course, that brings the whole question of whether it has becoming or is becoming more difficult to get that and that is a whole other conversation.
That is a whole other conversation, perhaps for another day, because that's a big topic.
That is a lot to unpack, as our viewers are quite aware.
What we found with people are asking also about supply managed industries, and that's big in Ontario and Quebec as well. We find that supply managed industries do not report the same amount of labor shortages. What they're telling us is that they're having increasing difficulties in finding people with the skills that they need. So that's the other half of the coin as well too. So not being able to find the bodies is one, and not being able to find the people with the skills needed is the other.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, even out here and in the beef sector, because these are some of the people that I visit with, and grain farmers as well, not to leave you guys out, but this example now comes from the beef sector, and I was chatting with one individual who was telling me that yes, he's been able to get as difficult as it is to get temporary foreign workers to work at his operation. One of the other conversations being the language barrier.
Yes.
And in my mind, I'm hearing the numbers that you guys are playing with all the time, and his need for labor coming up. And therefore, he's trying as best as he can. And I'm thinking as well, the training that has to go in.
Yes.
And should that particular individual, for some reason, have to go back because of their permits or whatever, he's invested time, money, and training into someone, then he has to start all over again.
Absolutely. And certainly we're talking about how immigration policies could potentially be changed in order to allow people who have jobs or have an offer of a job to come and work on farms. Certainly those sorts of policies vary by province as well too. So that's an area of active conversation.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that now, I've also chatted with folks, and this example is in the grain sector now, that they've had people coming in, again, temporary foreign workers, to fill those vacancies. They can't get locals to do it. And this is probably one of the success cases, that they've been here for that period of time, long enough for actually that individual to get citizenship.
Excellent. And that's very good.
Yeah, so those are the kinds of things that we're dealing with. Difficult to say how the situation has changed 2014 to 2018 now that the new survey is on the go.
Yes, now it is difficult, so that's why we're going out to ask farmers about their situation again now. Certainly when I'm speaking to groups and I say, think in your communities about how many 5 to 14-year-olds there are in your community right now, and people go, oh, you're right, there aren't very many. And I say those are the people that we have relied upon to work on our farms, to be the farmers and work on our farms in the future. And there are not very many young people growing up in those communities, where will the people come from to operate the farms, work on your farms in the future? And then we need to be thinking about bringing people in from other countries perhaps, or thinking about other people coming from other sectors who might have some capital to buy into farms, who are looking for a different kind of lifestyle, that we need to be thinking more thoughtfully about those sorts of things.
Yes. Now, the projection, and I seem to remember the figures, were probably around the 100,000 mark by 2025, if correct me on that?
Our projection at that time was that we would be short of Canadian workers of 114,000 people to work on farms by 2025. Now, that is assuming that we were able to take advantage of all of our opportunities out there, and what our assumptions were as far as trade deals and what those opportunities might come to pass. It was also taking into mind what sorts of productivity enhancements we would have. So farmers are looking at using a variety of different types of technology and innovation in order to decrease the need for labor. So there may be the increasing use of drones, for example, in order to check your cows or to check your fields. There would be other sorts of data analytics, big data, those sorts of things that are coming down the pipe. Maybe not quite yet, but maybe in the future. So we're trying to get a handle on that, because if there is increasing use of technology, it may mean that we may not need to use labor as much as we would have in the past. And also, it may be that the number of temporary foreign workers that are coming into the country are increasing. And if that's the case, then that would be taking up some of that gap of Canadians. So we're just trying to get a sense of where things are. All at. Then what we'll do with this information is we'll go out and speak with provincial governments, speak with industry associations to say, you have your workforce, the farmers in your industry will be retiring likely in the next 10 years. It might be time now to be thinking about what the future might hold for your industry.
Yeah, because the contribution across the country, it's up there, in the billions in terms of GDP?
Absolutely, yes. So there are 2.3 million jobs are tied to agriculture. So primary production agriculture drives 2.3 million jobs in the economy, including food processing and the food services. And that's about 7% of GDP.
Yes, and for food processing to continue, of course, you need the raw materials which our ag producers have been producing through the years. And without the labor, it's hard to see that. On the technology and innovation side, I know one guy from Mannville actually has recently got an award from Alberta Science and Technology, and his own development, it's an open source concept, but it's a GPS-driven tractor.
Yes.
And that's been amazing, and farmers will continue to make those kinds of innovations.
Absolutely, and there are a number of exciting things happening that people are making those sorts of changes themselves on their own farms.
Yeah. Now, the other part of the conversation, and you hinted at it there, is those discussions you're having with the provincial and, let's say, federal governments, because what your survey, what the data should do is drive or at least affect change where policy is going. What's those conversations been like?
So many provinces, what they do is they do occupational forecasting themselves. So they are looking at the top 10 occupations in their province for the future. And there's, in order to be speaking with high school students, parents of students, and also colleges to say, okay, where are there going to be shortages in the future and where will there be job opportunities? And sometimes agriculture is not included in that discussion. So what we're doing is we're speaking with provincial governments across the country to say, this is our findings, these are our research findings, so please include agriculture when you're in the discussions about where there will be jobs available in the future. It's very funny when provincial governments do not include agriculture. You might see on one side a job board with hundreds of jobs available, and on the other side they will say that there's a surplus, that there is no shortage of agricultural jobs. So we're just kind of pointing out to people the differences there and saying, yes, there are shortages, as evidenced by the jobs that are being advertised. So please, when you are talking about what jobs there are and will be in the future that they will be in need, to please include agriculture.
Does your scope, the scope of your organization, allow you guys to say go out to reach out to schools, the 4-H groups and so on?
Right. So we're a small organization, so we do go out to some associations and organizations, but we work through groups such as 4-H, agriculture in the classroom, and other organizations that are encouraging young people to consider careers in agriculture. So we provide them with the information that they can then go out and do the good work that they do.
Yeah, that's perfect there, because you need that unless a young person is inspired in that respect. And lots of youngsters, maybe 30, 40 years ago, they were closer to agriculture.
Right.
Now, not so much.
That's right. And there are people who grew up on farms and they know what the life is. And but there are lots of young people that grow up in small towns, in suburbs, who might also be interested in agriculture in some capacity, whether on the farm or along the supply chain somewhere. It's an exciting and growing industry, and I think there's a role for all of us to be speaking to people about what the opportunities are.
Very in-depth conversation there with Debra Hauer. She grew up on a farm in Hillmont, Saskatchewan. She now works with the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council in Ottawa. Please take the survey. Just go on their website, take that survey. Let's see where we stand in terms of labor shortfall in agriculture, and that'll affect policy in terms of finding or filling those bodies by some means. Right, still to come, tips for producers facing tight winter feed. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We've got some tips now for producers facing short winter feed supplies.
Managing cows through the winter is a tough ask, especially when producers are looking for out calves in the spring. When feed is tight, maintaining body score becomes even more critical. Reynold Bergen with the Beef Cattle Research Council is helping producers with their winter feeding programs.
Find out what you've got available. The second step is to test it, and the third is to work with a nutritionist to match your feeds together so that the animal requirements are met. And at the same time, that nutritionist can help you identify where there's gaps.
Covering those gaps will meet energy needs, protein, minerals, and vitamins that may need to be added, and you also need to know at what stage of winter or spring those supplements will be needed.
What are your most cost-effective supplement options that are around? When do you need to supplement? Which animals do you need to feed them to, right? So if you've got a big variation in feed quality, reserve the best quality hay for the thinner and older and younger animals that need the best groceries.
Bergen says the middle cows can get by on the usual tougher diet, but producers need to feed test, especially on byproducts and feed-grade products.
The really cool thing about cows is that they can eat just about anything and turn it into groceries. But when you're feeding something unusual, you need to make sure that they're getting the nutrients they need, but not getting anti-nutritional things that may harm feed quality.
Well, that's a wrap on this week's show. I'm Gerard Lampow. We'll see you next time.